When I think about anticipation just as in terms of a simple ball, basically if the ball just goes up, it has nothing that made it go up. It has no inertia, it has no momentum. Where does it get that momentum? Well, it gets it from anticipating, squashing down. And again, that is stretch and squash, but that squash is an anticipation to give momentum so that it can rise up. If you don't anticipate that ball that just goes up, it's like, whoa, wait, where did that come from? When you anticipate the squash down and then go up, it lets the audience know, oh, hey, something's going to happen here.
One thing that you should be able to notice right off the bat in a comparison like this is the similarities between, the basic bouncing ball and the average jump of a human being. If you just compare the hips of what Bobby's doing right now, this straight up and down jump, and compare the way that his hips are moving to the way that the ball moves, the similarities, I think, are really obvious to look at, particularly in anticipation. Bobby can't just suddenly levitate up into the air. Pay close attention to the overall movement of Bobby's hips, the up-down movement, that anticipation down before he's able to launch himself up into the air. It's that squash down where he's building the force and the energy to fire himself up into the air. And the bouncing ball works exactly the same way. The ball can't just suddenly, jump up into the air without pushing itself. It has to push itself into the air. Nothing is pulling it up. When you forget about anticipation and when you leave it out, that's when things start to look like they're being pulled into the air, or pulled up into the sky, or yanked around on a screen, rather than moving themselves around on their own volition, using their muscles and the forces within their body to actually move around.
Motion without anticipation is weak and powerless, and it doesn't have any force, and it doesn't have any weight or momentum or inertia. Anticipation is a mechanical buildup of force. Anticipation can be used for comedic effect. Or rather, very often the lack of anticipation can be used for comedic effect. We'll end up talking about it more in the advanced anticipation class. But sometimes an anticipation is going to be a pause. Sometimes it's going to be a blink of an eye, or sometimes it's going to be just a really slight, really subtle movement that just adds an extra little tiny nuance to your scene that wouldn't have existed before. It makes it just that much better, adds a little bit more entertainment value to it, a little bit more interest, a little bit more lifelike movement to your scene. So that's stuff that we're going to get into more later, how anticipation can show the thought process of what a character is going through, or how it can help sell a joke, and all those things. All that stuff is a little more advanced. For today's class, we're going to be talking more about anticipation as related to that more mechanical buildup of force, that buildup of energy, the most fundamental, the basics of anticipation, and it's important to master that stuff first.
I think Garfield said for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. Was it Garfield?
Can't remember.
I can't. Or that was underweight and overtall. I keep getting those mixed up. No, but for every action there's a reaction, pretty much. And an anticipation is what happens before the action. You can't just go forward. It'll look silly.
Very often the problem that we see in demo reels is that there is no anticipation, that things are just happening. And I've talked to students who feel like, oh, well, I don't need to use anticipation because I'm working in a more naturalistic, mode. Hey, anticipation is just for animation. That's just for cartoony. I don't need to do anticipation because I'm doing, more naturalistic motion. They feel like anticipation doesn't apply. That's crap. That's wrong. It's so wrong. We see so many demo reels where the anticipation is either neglected or used in the wrong places.
The basics absolutely apply. You will find that whether it's cartoony or realistic, the principles are there for a reason.
Even if you are doing a realistic stuff, without anticipation, it doesn't look right. Yeah, I thought anticipation was only in a really cartoony field, but for the real world, there is.
The more anticipation there is, the more cartoony your work is going to look. But what is really wrong is to say, well, in real life, there is no anticipation to movement.
So, you think there's no anticipation in nature? Welcome
to the no anticipation zone. We've taken live action footage and spliced out the anticipations of actions, and you'll notice two things right away. First, it's going to look totally bizarre, really poppy, and impossible. Second, you're going to notice that the actions look either weak because they don't have the anticipation, or they don't read. It's difficult to tell what's going on, especially with some of the throws. Things happen so fast that without the anticipation there, it's really difficult to tell what happened. What are you seeing? The only times in real life that there's any kind of major action without an anticipation is going to be, let's say, if somebody has a rope wrapped around their waist tied to a motorboat that takes off from the dock and it's just going to jerk them off of the dock. Or if somebody gets hit with a bat or something like that, they're just going to fall. They're not going to anticipate that fall. They're going to get hit with the bat and they're going to fall. Those outside forces, which a lot of people will call external forces, and we'll have classes about force later on where we'll talk more about this idea. But when something is an external force that's affecting the body, somebody getting punched, hit, they're getting yanked off of a board or whatever, there's not going to be anticipation for that because they're not expecting it and their body isn't doing it of its own volition, under its own power, right? But for most movements, especially most major movements, our body is going to anticipate. And if you leave that out in your work, it's going to look like your body, your character is being affected by external forces all the time, like a marionette puppet or something like that, where it'll look like your character is IK. And there's nothing wrong, I don't think, with animating a character IK. You just need to make sure that you don't animate the character in a way that looks like, instead of reaching over for the couch, it looks like something grabbed my wrist and pulled it over to the couch, right? Yeah, it needs to look like I did it. And that's gonna start in my shoulder, and it's gonna probably lead with my elbow a little bit. And it's that motion that gets my hand to the couch. If my hand went to the couch like this, that's just unnatural, and there's no mechanics going on. Even though a lot of anticipations can be, extremely subtle when you're just observing real life, it's important to pay attention to them anyway and to learn about why they exist and how they work, and even on such a tiny level, why they are there in the first place.
There's all these things going on in animation, like momentum, inertia, gravity, and if you're going to do a move, then you have to get the energy somehow to do that move.
It would do a little one-frame blip before the thing. And it ended up, usually it's on like the Z, on the up and down. I would do like a little, before I go down, I do just a hair of an up. And you never see it, but you feel it. And I did an experiment. It was a Toy Story 2 because it was Buzz Lightyear. And I ripped it, I put it all in there, and then I ripped all of those out, and I A-B'd it, the recordings. And there was a definite difference. You couldn't say what it was. I would challenge anybody to say, oh, this is what you're doing. But you just felt it, and it just felt to me more alive. That's a trade secret right there. But it felt to me more alive. It's definitely, if I have anything in my bag of tricks, that's one of my big ones. But because it's, again, setting up this energy to do something and doing it in a way that feels more natural and less programmed.
At its heart, anticipation is a mechanical buildup of force, where you're building up these forces and energy and almost this like untapped energy that you're balling it all up and you're getting it all ready, and then you're releasing it, and that release of that energy is what gets the character walking in the direction he's going to go, or it gets the ball flying in the direction that he's throwing it. Without anticipation, the best pitcher isn't going to be able to throw very fast. Mike Tyson couldn't punch very hard. The best soccer player in the world isn't going to be able to kick the ball very far. You can only punch so hard if you're just using the muscles in your arm. Boxers train like crazy to be able to punch so fast that their anticipations are lightning quick, because they don't want the other guy to have a chance to react. They don't want the other guy to have a chance to see what's on the way. You know, if they're just throwing big, you know, haymakers with giant anticipations, most of those punches are going to be dodged, and they're probably going to get whooped, right? You know, it's like a pitcher. He does this big wind-up, and he gets all coiled up like, you know, really like a spring, and he's really tight, and he gets his whole body all wound up. If you're just using those muscles in your arm, it's not going anywhere. Not very quickly, anyway. If you really watch a pitcher, I mean, study a pitcher, they have like a crazy wind-up. They wind up like a spring, you know? All of a pitcher's energy gets all wound up into this giant anticipation, and then he just unwraps and uncoils and unleashes this crazy amount of force that is coming up through his hips, and it goes up through his torso, and then whips his shoulder, and then his elbow, and then finally his hand around, and it's this big, he's throwing much more from his hips and his chest than he is with his arm. You know, the arm is almost just kind of along for the ride until the very end when it whips around, and yeah, having a strong throwing arm right then really comes in handy, but most of the energy and most of the force is coming from the body.